Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere no one in their right mind would choose for a vacation, Antarctica in 1914. You're bundled in layers of wool and fur, your breath freezing instantly against your scarf, and around you, nothing but an endless horizon of bone-white ice. The wind is shrieking, the sun barely rises, and the temperature drops so low it could shatter glass. You're part of a crew of 28 men, and your job, believe it or not, is to cross this entire continent on foot. Spoiler, you're not going to make it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. Let's see who's the farthest from Antarctica tonight. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's December 1914. The world is sliding into the First World War, but down here, it feels like another planet. You're standing on the deck of a sturdy wooden ship called the Endurance, captained by the unflinchingly calm Sir Ernest Shackleton, British-born and Irish-raised. Shackleton isn't just your boss, he's the guy with the charisma to convince 24 men to sign up for a death march across the most inhospitable land on Earth. You sail south through the treacherous waters of the Southern Ocean, dodging icebergs that look like floating cathedrals. The closer you get to the Weddell Sea, the slower your progress. Ice thickens, temperatures plummet. You start sleeping in your coat, gloves still on. Then, on January 18th, 1915, the Endurance halts. She's stuck. The sea has frozen around the ship like quick-drying cement. You and the crew try to break through, sawing and hacking with whatever you can. Shackleton pretends to be optimistic, but even he knows you're going nowhere. So you wait. Weeks pass. The ship doesn't move. Then something terrifying happens. The ice doesn't just trap the Endurance. It begins to crush it. You hear the groans first, then the pops, like gunshots. The hull bends, wooden beams snap like twigs. Shackleton orders you all to abandon ship and set up camp on the ice itself. You step off the deck into the frozen unknown. You've brought what you can: tents, food, lifeboats, sled dogs, and even a banjo for morale. Yes, a banjo. It belonged to the ship's meteorologist, who argued it was essential for mental health. Shackleton agreed. He was big on morale, small on comfort. Historians still argue whether his decisions were genius leadership or reckless improvisation. For now, you're stuck on a shifting patch of ice, camping beside the wreckage of your only shelter. You sleep in reindeer skin sleeping bags that smell vaguely of wet dog. At night, the ice beneath you creaks and groans. Sometimes it splits open. Once, your tent mate nearly falls into a hidden crevasse while stepping out to relieve himself. The cold is constant. The sun barely peeks over the horizon. Time loses meaning. Days blur together. You eat seal meat and penguin stew, which tastes like fishy rubber dipped in bacon grease. The cook tries his best, but there's only so much you can do with blubber and snow. Then October, the Endurance finally gives out. She sinks beneath the ice, broken beyond saving. You watch the masts vanish, one by one, swallowed by a sea so cold it doesn't even steam. You're 800 miles from civilization, with no radio, no GPS, and nothing but two lifeboats and each other. And yet, Shackleton is calm. In fact, he starts giving motivational speeches. He assures you again and again that he'll get everyone home. Not most of us, not those who stay strong, all of you, every last man. It's that promise, whispered beside ice fires and overboiled seal soup, that keeps the group from fracturing. Historians often debate if Shackleton was overly confident or simply had no other choice. But the psychological impact huge. You march across the ice dragging lifeboats, trying to find open water. The ice won't let you go. Sometimes you make only a mile or two a day. Other days, you give up before lunch because the winds are so brutal you can't even face into them. You try to sleep, but your sleeping bag is permanently damp. Your beard freezes to your scarf. And every morning, Shackleton makes the rounds. He talks to each man, checks in, tells jokes, even has a few awkward dance sessions just to get people moving. It sounds silly now, but when your bones ache and your skin is raw, that kind of ridiculous optimism is oxygen. One day, you hear something new, a deep, echoing crack in the distance. Open water. The pack ice is breaking up. You all race to the boats. They're barely seaworthy, patched together with nails, bits of tent canvas, and frozen hope. You load up everything: food, dogs, supplies, even the banjo. Can't forget that. Then into the water. It's chaos. Swells toss the boats like toys. Ice chunks drift by like silent giants. Salt spray freezes instantly on your face, but you paddle like mad, desperate to find land before the wind flips you like a coin. That night, you collapse on the ice, exhausted and half frozen. Still alive, you've made it this far, but you're starting to realize the worst is still ahead. The moment you start drifting on the sea ice, something inside you shifts. You're not on an expedition anymore. You're a castaway, a drifting speck on a frozen ocean, at the mercy of forces that don't know you exist and wouldn't care if they did. Shackleton names the new campsite Ocean Camp, which is almost funny, since there's no ocean in sight. Just a wide, blinding plain of ice stretching in every direction. Underneath it, the Weddell Sea churns, dark and unknowable. You can hear it sometimes, the groan of black water beneath a crust of white. You move again in December, foot by agonizing foot, hoping to find better ice or open water. The new place is nicknamed Patience Camp, and it lives up to the name. You sit there for months, literal months, waiting for the ice to either release you or kill you. Your days fall into a numb rhythm. Breakfast is usually a biscuit, some powdered milk, and maybe a lump of boiled seal fat if you're lucky. You try not to think about sugar or hot coffee or the feel of clean socks. You play cards. You argue about who snores loudest. You read whatever book survived the sinking. One guy even tries to memorize Shakespeare, which would be inspiring if his breath didn't smell like penguin liver. Every so often, the ice shifts violently beneath you. You wake up with your tent sagging sideways, or your boots frozen solid from the snow that crept in during the night. You lash your gear tighter, stuff more socks inside your coat, and start the day again. Meanwhile, Shackleton watches everything. The man barely sleeps. He knows how fast morale can rot. He makes sure no one eats alone, that duties rotate, that no one, no matter how grumpy or frostbitten, gets isolated. One night, he does something strange. He wakes up his second in command, Frank Wild, and quietly says, "If anything happens to me, you're in charge. Get them home." He never mentions it again, but you can tell he's preparing for the worst. And it's coming. By April 1916, the ice starts to break for real. Cracks spider out like shattered glass. The entire camp shakes. You scramble to move the boats to the edge of the floe, now finally open to the sea. You wait for the moment when there's enough water to escape, and when it comes, it's chaos all over again. You pile into the boats, 3 of them, and launch into the slush and swell of the Southern Ocean. The cold is brutal. You don't just feel it in your skin, you feel it in your teeth, your nails, your dreams. The sea is alive with chunks of jagged ice that slam into the boat with a crunch that makes your stomach drop. Salt spray stings your eyes. Your hands are raw from rowing. When you try to sleep, you curl up on soggy wood and shiver violently until you pass out. There's no land in sight, just ice, sky, and sea. You have no idea where you're going, but Shackleton does. You trust him. That trust keeps you rowing. It keeps you sane, because if you let yourself think about what would happen if he's wrong, you'd stop rowing and let the sea take you. After 7 days of this madness, just when your body is a tangle of frostbite and exhaustion, someone sees it land, Elephant Island. It rises from the mist like a stone cathedral, jagged, hostile, but solid. You cheer, you cry. Some of the crew just collapse into the bottom of the boat and sob. But landing isn't easy. There's no beach, just cliffs, rocks, and surf strong enough to flip a whale. One boat gets stuck. Another nearly capsizes. You finally scramble ashore, wet to the bone and half dead, but wildly, impossibly alive. It's the first time in 497 days that your feet touch solid ground. Elephant Island is miserable. Don't get it twisted. It's shaped like a tusk, constantly lashed by wind and waves. There's no food here, no shelter, just rocks, seals, and sorrow. But compared to drifting on ice for over a year, it's paradise. You make camp in an upturned boat, half buried in gravel. The men call it the snuggery, which is both cute and deeply ironic, because the roof leaks, the wind howls, and everyone's slowly turning into moldy jerky. Still here, you can breathe, cook, think. That's when Shackleton makes his boldest decision yet. He gathers 5 men. They're the strongest, the least frostbitten. With them, he's going to attempt the unthinkable sail 800 miles in an open boat to South Georgia Island to get help. The journey could take 2 weeks through the roughest seas on Earth, with only a sextant, some charts, and a boat patched with seal blood and prayer. The rest of you will stay here on Elephant Island, under the command of Frank Wild. Shackleton promises he'll return. It's the kind of promise that makes you want to believe in angels, or fate, or something bigger than just survival. You watch them sail away into the fog, 6 tiny figures in a boat called the James Caird. No one says what you're all thinking. What if they never come back? The moment the James Caird disappears into the fog, a different kind of silence settles over Elephant Island. Not the quiet of wind or waves, those are constant, but the silence of waiting, of uncertainty, the kind that gnaws at your nerves like salt on raw skin. You're not moving anymore. You're not chasing open water or dodging ice floes. You're sitting still, staring at the sea, hoping Shackleton is out there somewhere, still alive. Frank Wilde takes over as leader. He's a quiet guy, not the speech-making type, but his presence is solid like the rocks you're sleeping under. Every morning, he walks out of the tent and says the same thing. Pack up your things, boys. The boss may come today. Even on days when the snow blinds you, even when the wind screams like banshees in your ears, even when half the camp is hallucinating from hunger and cold. You don't believe it, but you want to, and sometimes that's enough. You live in a cramped hut made from 2 overturned lifeboats. The floor is gravel and seal bones. The walls are stitched together with soaked canvas, old sleeping bags, and anything else you could salvage. Snow leaks in through every seam. You wake up with frost on your eyelashes. Your hands stay numb most days. One guy gets trench foot so bad his toes turn black and squishy, like overripe bananas. And yet you survive. You eat penguins. You boil seal blubber into something resembling soup. You clean wounds with melted snow and curses. When your boots fall apart, you wrap your feet in strips of old clothing. Every now and then, someone pulls out the banjo again. You sit in a circle, shivering and singing off-key sea shanties, like it's a Broadway rehearsal in a meat locker. There are jokes, believe it or not. Someone coins the phrase, Hell's Waiting Room, to describe the hut. Another guy writes fake newspaper headlines, like gentlemen prefer blubber fashion trends for the ice-stranded. Historians still argue whether humor was what truly held the men together, or if it was just a byproduct of boredom and impending madness. But either way, it helps. The weather doesn't. Winter is coming fast. Storms hit with terrifying force, slamming into the coast and blasting icy spray through your meager shelter. One gust rips a section of canvas off the roof, and you spend an entire night curled into each other, praying the next wave doesn't drag you out to sea like a discarded glove. Still, you wait. You count the days. You scratch tally marks into the boat hull, week after week after week. You imagine Shackleton lying face down in a broken boat, or frozen to death on some nameless glacier, or eaten by the sea he dared to challenge. But Frank Wilde never stops saying it. He pack up. Boys, the boss may come today. One night, your tent mate mutters in his sleep, I heard him. I heard the oars. You didn't. But now you listen for them. 2, eventually, your body adjusts to the misery. Sort of. Your senses dull. Your stomach shrinks. Hunger becomes this quiet, constant ache you stop talking about. You ration everything 1 biscuit a day, a square inch of meat. If that, you eat old seal bones. You chew rawhide rope. Anything to keep going. One man tries to eat frozen seaweed. He spends the next day vomiting into a snowdrift. The loneliness becomes its own creature. It crawls inside your chest and wraps around your lungs. You miss the color green. You miss birdsong. You miss silence that doesn't feel like a tomb. Then, in July, 3 months after Shackleton left, someone thinks they see a boat. You all scramble outside, half blind from squinting at the horizon for too long. But it's a false alarm, just a shadow, maybe a rock, maybe your brain playing tricks again. But a strange thing happens. The next day, Wilde doesn't say the line. He doesn't tell you to pack. No one says anything. The wind howls. The snow falls. And for the first time, you start to consider the unthinkable. Maybe he's not coming back. You lie awake that night, watching the tent flap twitch in the wind. You try to remember what Shackleton said just before he left. His voice, his face, but they're fading now. He feels like a story you once believed in. Then August 30th, 1916, someone screams. You bolt upright. You think it's another nightmare. But then you hear it again. Not a scream, a shout. You rush outside, half dressed, your legs stiff and stupid. And there on the horizon, you see it, a boat. And not just any boat, Shackleton's boat, with Shackleton in it. He's waving. You collapse to your knees. You laugh. You cry. You're not sure if you're hallucinating or actually witnessing a miracle. Shackleton steps onto shore. He looks thinner, grayer, like someone who's aged a decade in a few months. But his eyes are still bright, still alive. And the first thing he says, "Are you all well?" Frank Wilde salutes. "All safe, boss. All well. Not a single man lost. Not one. It's been 128 days since the James Caird vanished. You survived Elephant Island on faith, frostbite, and pure, stubborn hope. And now it's over. Or is it? Because you still don't know what Shackleton endured to get back to you. Not yet. You're still trying to wrap your head around it. Shackleton is really here like some mythic figure carved out of fog and sea salt. But what you don't know, not yet, is that his story is even crazier than yours. After he sailed away in the James Caird, it was 14 days of pure maritime madness. 6 men in a 22-foot boat, packed with supplies, lashed together with nails and canvas patches. You think back to that boat now, remembering how fragile it looked, like a toy scowling at the southern ocean. They faced waves as tall as buildings. Shackleton later said it was like being tossed around inside a rolling oil drum. Water poured in constantly. The sail ripped. The men took turns bailing with tin cans, hands frozen, eyes red from the salt spray, and the cold well. The cold made Elephant Island feel like a Caribbean holiday. Some nights, they couldn't even lie down, just slumped sideways against the gunwale, trying not to vomit or sob. One storm nearly sank them. The sea rose in a vertical wall, and just before it slammed into the boat, Shackleton shouted, "For God's sake, hold on." They rode it like a roller coaster from hell over the peak, down the back, drenched but miraculously afloat. Historians still argue as whether it was Shackleton's navigation skill or dumb luck that got them through. Honestly, it was probably both. Their only guide was a sextant and brief glimpses of the sun on the few occasions it deigned to appear. Worsley, the navigator, managed to spot the sun 4 times in 2 weeks. 4 times, that's it. Yet somehow, on May 10th, 1916, they spotted South Georgia Island on the horizon. But don't uncork the champagne just yet. They landed barely on the wrong side of the island. The whaling station they needed was on the opposite coast. Between them and rescue 30 miles of glaciers, mountains, and sheer madness. No one had ever crossed the interior of South Georgia before. No maps, no trails, no gear. They had a length of rope, a carpenter's adze, and a handful of biscuits. But Shackleton didn't hesitate. He picked 2 men, Worsley and Crean, and left the others with barely enough food to survive. "If we don't come back in 3 days," he said, "you're on your own." Then he stepped into the mountains. You can try to picture it: 3 men in tattered wool clothing, climbing jagged peaks and slipping across ice fields under perpetual twilight, their boots falling apart, beards frozen, navigating by the stars and the sound of distant seals. No tents, no sleeping bags, just movement. Shackleton feared that if they stopped for even an hour, they'd freeze to death. So they walked for 36 straight hours. At one point, they had to slide down a mountainside using the rope like a bobsled track. At another, they marched into a whiteout, guessing the slope by the direction of the wind. And yet, they made it. At 7 a.m. on May 20th, 1916, 3 ghosts in rags stumbled into the whaling station at Stromness. The whalers stared, dumbfounded. One of them muttered, "Who the hell are you?" Shackleton said, "My name is Shackleton." There was a beat of silence, then chaos. They hadn't heard a word from the expedition in 17 months. Everyone had assumed you were dead. But Shackleton didn't rest, didn't even change clothes. He immediately set about organizing the rescue of the men still stranded first, the 3 left behind on the far side of the island. Then you, still clinging to hope back on Elephant Island. It took 4 attempts. The first 3 rescue ships were blocked by ice or turned back by storms. You didn't know it at the time. You just sat in your hut, waiting, praying, listening to Frank Wilde's daily mantra. But behind the scenes, Shackleton was fighting every obstacle the Southern Ocean could throw at him. Money, politics, logistics. Time it all had to be begged, borrowed, or outwitted. And finally, with the help of a Chilean vessel, the Yelcho, Shackleton returned on August 30th. Now, back on the boat, you watch Elephant Island shrink behind you, the place that tried to kill you, the place that somehow didn't. The men are quiet. No one cheers. There's just the soft clink of tin mugs and the hum of the engine. You see one man tracing a finger over a photo of his wife, like he's making sure she's real. And Shackleton, he doesn't rest. He doesn't gloat. He just walks among the men, making sure you're fed, warm, and accounted for. One guy's hands are shaking so badly he can't tie his boots. Shackleton kneels and does it for him. He saved every last man. Historians still argue whether that was due to his skill, his leadership, or some combination of obsession and stubborn love. But one thing is crystal clear: nobody else could have pulled it off. Later, when the crew returns to England, the world is in chaos. World War I is raging. Empires are crumbling. Most people barely notice the return of the Endurance expedition. But you notice, you remember everything. The hunger, the cold, the black ocean, the voice saying, "The boss may come today." And then he did. Now that you're safe, now that you're warm, finally you start asking the questions. What made Shackleton keep going? Why didn't he break? Why didn't you? You've seen what isolation can do. It shrinks the soul, makes time bend and stretch like old leather. You'd think it would tear a man apart. But Shackleton, he held everyone together like glue made of grit and stubborn optimism. You remember a moment on the Endurance, before it sank, the ship trapped in ice, the wind howling like an animal in heat, and Shackleton walking the deck, calm, always calm, like he knew something you didn't. He carried a pocket copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. Poetic, fatalistic stuff. Every now and then, he'd read a line aloud, just loud enough for you to hear. It made the fear feel smaller. He also banned conversations about the future. No use worrying about home. He said, home isn't here, and that was true. Home was not here, but he was, and that meant something. Historians still argue whether Shackleton's leadership was calculated genius or instinctive magic, but either way, he knew what made people tick. He paired roommates not by rank, but by personality. He adjusted meals to lift morale, served a rare hot drink when someone looked close to cracking. Once, he gave away his mittens and nearly lost his fingers. Another time, he found a man hoarding food and didn't punish him. He just walked away. Disappointed, that was worse than any scolding. He listened. That might sound small, but in Antarctica, small things save lives. Shackleton knew when to let someone vent, when to share a cigarette, when to laugh. He'd sit in the tent, cracking jokes about Edwardian fashion or his own wretched beard. He was the last to eat, the first to risk himself, and he never gave orders when requests would do. Would you mind doing this, he'd say, like you had a choice. But of course, you'd do it. Every time. He didn't just lead from the front, he bled from the front. And that made all the difference. You think of the one time he cried. Just once. After that final rescue, when you were all safe aboard the Yelcho. He looked at the island, then quietly turned away. Someone caught a glimpse of tears on his face. That was Shackleton, but don't get it twisted. This man was no angel. He gambled everything to chase glory, took 27 men into one of the most brutal environments on Earth without a functioning radio, betting he could outstubborn nature. He once borrowed money from friends and never paid them back. He fudged the truth to investors. One time, he literally bought a ship that was already leaking. And yet, you'd still follow him, because when things got bad, he was the guy you wanted beside you. Not because he had all the answers, but because he made you believe you'd find them. Together, you flash back to the lowest moment when the Endurance finally gave up the ghost. The groaning, cracking, shrieking noise as the ice crushed her ribs. You remember standing there, watching her disappear beneath the ice, like watching a loved one sink into a grave. You looked at Shackleton, he looked at the wreck, and then he turned to you and said, "She's gone, now we'll go home." Simple, no theatrics, just a promise. That was the moment you knew he'd die trying to save you, and he almost did. He aged years and months. His hair went gray, his body broke down, but still he walked, he steered, he held the rope. He never stopped moving forward, even when the world itself seemed to lean back against him. Historians still argue whether Shackleton was a failed explorer or one of history's greatest leaders. He never reached the South Pole. He never made the first crossing of Antarctica. But he never lost a man not in this journey. And in the end, that mattered more. You sit now in a quiet barracks, miles and years removed from the chaos of Elephant Island. You've written letters to your family. You've eaten real bread for the first time in nearly 2 years. You're wearing socks that aren't frozen stiff, and yet, something in you misses the white silence. The breath of cold air sharp enough to slice thoughts in half. The bond you had with those men. Out there in the endless ice, nothing in civilization compares. You still carry the scars on your fingers, your toes, and somewhere deeper. You wonder if Shackleton sleeps at night. You doubt it, because he's already planning the next expedition. You know him. He can't sit still. His soul's too restless, too tethered to that wind-bitten corner of the world. He'll go back, of course he will, but you're not sure. The frost still lives in your bones, and you've seen the edge. You stood on it. So for now, you sit, you sip tea, and you tell the story because some things you can't forget, like the sound of Shackleton's boots in the snow, or the words he whispered when the storm was worst. We'll get through this. Together, you don't expect it, but the moment it hits you is quiet. Not when the ship arrives, not when you step onto the dock with numb feet and that strange, almost guilty relief. Not even when you catch your first scent of real food-baked bread, not blubber stew. No, it happens later, alone, sitting by a window, half watching rain slide down glass. You tilt your head. No wind, no creaking ice, just stillness. And suddenly, you feel it, the weight of what you've survived. But back then on the ice, you didn't have time for emotion. You lived hour to hour, minute to minute. You worried more about frostbite than feelings. Still, survival wasn't just about rations and routine. It was a war of the mind. Shackleton understood that. So he invented structure, a schedule, even when the world outside was chaos. Breakfast at the same time, chores assigned, boots checked, tents swept. He turned madness into monotony, and that saved your sanity. Even more bizarre, he made sure you celebrated holidays. You remember Christmas on the floe. Wild decorated a tin with penguin feathers. Someone found a crust of plum pudding. You sang songs off-key, voices cracking with cold. It was ridiculous and perfect. Shackleton even organized dog races and talent shows, not because anyone felt like laughing, but because laughter made you human. One of the men Ordleys kept a diary. He wrote, "We are literally imprisoned in ice, and yet there is an odd kind of happiness among us. That's the part people don't understand. The weird comfort that grows when you're cut off from the world, bound to 27 souls by nothing but survival and a stove made from salvaged pipe. You remember the sound it made, the hollow pop of seal fat bubbling. You hated it. You miss it. But things weren't always cheerful. Some nights, you could feel the mood shift. Men stared at nothing for hours. One guy muttered in his sleep, full conversations with people long dead. The cold didn't just bite the skin, it hollowed out the spirit. Frank Wilde, your second in command after Shackleton left, once said, "Optimism is true moral courage." So he became a kind of ice-bound cheerleader. Every morning he called out, "Get your things ready. Boys, the boss may come today." Day after day, even when it seemed impossible. And that phrase stuck in your mind like a mantra. The boss may come today. Some days, you hated him for saying it, but you needed to hear it. You needed to believe. Historians still argue whether Wilde's optimism was strategic or delusional, but either way, it kept men alive, and not everyone did survive intact. One crew member lost most of his toes to frostbite. Another would never stop limping. You remember watching someone cry, not from pain, but from relief when Shackleton finally appeared on the horizon with the rescue ship. That was the day the waiting ended. But it wasn't the end, because even after you left the ice didn't leave you. It showed up in your dreams, in your joints, in the silence of a crowded room. People back home didn't understand. They asked strange questions. Was it beautiful? No. And yes. It was like staring into the heart of the world before people, before noise. Just wind and snow and the knowledge that no one was coming for you unless you made them. You look at Shackleton now. He's thinner, grayer, but his eyes still burning. He talks about going back, about making another attempt to cross the continent. You should be shocked. You should tell him he's mad. Instead, you nod because you know. He's not done with Antarctica, and Antarctica isn't done with him. There's a strange fraternity among those who faced that place and lived. You speak in half sentences, inside jokes, long silences. You feel it when someone drops a spoon, and half the room flinches like it's a creaking mast. One man says he can't sleep unless he hears wind against canvas. Another keeps a piece of the Endurance's wood in his pocket, polished smooth from nervous fingers. You carry your own relics, the scar on your ankle, the memory of penguin meat, the sound of ice splitting like thunder in a cathedral. They say trauma lives in the body. If that's true, your body is a map of every frozen mile you walked. And still, you're glad you went, because out there, in the worst of it, you discovered something you can't unknow. Humans are absurdly, stupidly, gloriously resilient. And Shackleton, he's the reason you learned that. You think back to the time he stopped you from giving up, when your hands were too cold to lace your boots, and you said, "I can't." He didn't yell, he just helped you up, held your eyes with his, and said, "Then I'll help you until you can." That wasn't just Shackleton the leader. That was Shackleton the man, the one who read poetry, told bad jokes, and carried the weight of 27 souls on his shoulders without ever asking for applause. Now, with the world spinning again, with war raging and newspapers printing fresh disasters every day, you know this people will forget the endurance. They'll forget the ship, the ice, the long march, but you won't. And maybe, just maybe, neither will the world if you keep telling the story. So you do. You write it, speak it, remember it. And every time someone asks, "How did you all survive for over a year in Antarctica?" you smile, because the answer is simple. Shackleton, you're back on solid ground. Yes, but your mind still drifts to the ice, to the cold, to Shackleton's voice in the wind, saying, "Not yet. Lads, we keep going." The world around you has changed. Trams clatter down London streets. War looms in the headlines. Everyone's in a rush again. But inside, you're slower, quieter, more aware of how fragile comfort really is. People at dinner parties ask, "What was it like?" And you have to smile and sip your tea. Because how do you explain sleeping inside a sealskin sack while frost grew on your eyelashes? How do you describe the colorless horizon? Or the day you tasted raw penguin liver and decided it wasn't that bad? So instead, you say, "It was cold," and leave it there. But here's the truth, the part you rarely share. The danger never really ended. Even after the rescue, even after you left Elephant Island, because before you could be safe, you had to get safe. And that meant one more journey. Remember the James Caird, that glorified rowboat. Barely 22 feet long, you helped drag it across the rocky shore. watched Shackleton point toward South Georgia, a tiny speck nearly 800 miles away, and say, "That's our only chance." Just thinking about it makes your stomach drop. The Southern Ocean is no joke, even today. With sonar and satellite radios, ships fear it. Back then, it was madness. Madness with a map. But Shackleton chose 5 men, packed some ship's biscuits, and set sail, while you stayed behind, watched the boat shrink to a speck, and prayed it wouldn't vanish like the Endurance. Every day after that felt like forever. Back on Elephant Island, Frank Wilde kept up the routine. Chores, meals, jokes. But the fear was always there. You wondered if Shackleton had drowned, if the boat had shattered, if you were waiting for no one. Some men lost hope. You held on, barely. Historians still argue whether the James Caird voyage was the greatest small boat journey ever made. Some say it was blind luck. Others say it was Shackleton's supreme skill. Either way, it was a miracle. The boat survived hurricanes, towering waves, icy gales. You later read that Worsley, the navigator, made calculations using a sextant in a boat tossing like a cork. He nailed the target within a few nautical miles, in the middle of nowhere, with soaked charts and cracked ribs. You picture them out there, beards frozen, knuckles bleeding, soaked to the bone. Shackleton bailing water while McNish held the tiller. 6 men jammed in a coffin-sized shell, eating reindeer pemmican and dreaming of bread. And they made it. After 16 days, they crashed into South Georgia like shipwrecked ghosts. But of course, the story doesn't stop there, because they'd landed on the wrong side of the island. The whaling station civilization, help, hot food was on the other coast, separated by mountains no one had ever crossed. Steep, icy, full of crevasses. Oh, and did we mention they had no proper climbing gear? So what did Shackleton do? He climbed, with Worsley and Crean by his side. He hiked non-stop for 36 hours. No rest, no tents, no maps, just instinct and pure, reckless courage. At one point, they slid down a slope in the dark because going back meant dying. Historians still argue whether that descent was genius or sheer desperation, but it worked. You can still hear Worsley's words as they stumbled into the whaling station. They looked like men who had come back from the dead, and in a way, they had. The first thing Shackleton asked wasn't for a bath or a meal. He said, "My men, are they all well?" And when he heard yes, he wept. Back on Elephant Island, you didn't know any of this yet. You just saw the boat return weeks later, with Shackleton standing at the bow like a ghost with fire in his eyes. He had come back, like he promised. It took 4 attempts to reach you. Ice blocked him again and again, but he didn't stop. He said he'd return, and he did. Every single man stepped onto that rescue ship alive. Not one lost soul. You watch him now, sitting by the fire, thumbing through a notebook, planning, always planning. The cold still lives in his bones. Too, you can see it in the way he rubs his hands. He tells stories sometimes, mostly to boys eager for glory. But every now and then, his voice softens when he talks about Elephant Island. About you, he says, they never gave up. But you know the truth, he never gave up. And because of that, you're alive. You think of the small moments, how you shared a single chocolate square with another man when food was gone, how someone lent you dry socks without being asked, how a laugh, even a dry one, could warm you more than fire. That's what you carried home, not just the frostbite or the weight loss, but the memory of a crew who chose each other over fear, over comfort, over despair. You stretch your fingers now, still stiff from the cold that never quite left. And somewhere deep down, you know this? If he asked again, if Shackleton looked at you with that quiet fire and said, "There's one more journey," you'd go. Of course you would, because some leaders don't just command, they convince. You hear the knock before you see the face, a soft rap at the door. And then just like that, Shackleton is back. His coat is worn, his eyes a little duller than before, the weight of too many miles pressing into his spine. But still, there's that flicker, that glint of madness and purpose you've seen too many times to doubt. "We're going again," he says. He doesn't mean back to London, or even just back to sea. He means Antarctica. And this time, it's not about survival, not entirely. It's about legacy. You're older now. The frostbite aches worse in the cold. The stories have begun to feel more like myth than memory. But when he says it, something in you stirs, because you never really left the ice. Not in your heart. So you pack your bag. One more time. In 1921, you board the Quest, a much smaller ship, a rusted little vessel with a stubborn engine and none of the grandeur of the Endurance. But Shackleton doesn't care. He stands at the bow again, staring south, as if he's daring the continent to try and stop him. But this time, something's off. You see it in the way he moves slower down the deck, the way he coughs when he thinks no one's watching. He's burning the candle at both ends, and he knows it. Then one night, as the ship lies anchored off South Georgia, the island that once saved your life, it happens. He dies, quietly, in his cabin. The heart that had carried 27 men through hell finally gives out. You can't believe it at first. The man who faced hurricanes in a rowboat. The man who stared down starvation, frostbite, and despair with a smirk and a thermos of tea gone, just like that. You bury him there. On that island, South Georgia becomes his resting place. Not a graveyard of marble, but of wind and stone and snow, just the way he would have wanted. Historians still argue whether Shackleton's final voyage was necessary or foolish. Some say he was chasing glory. Others believe he simply couldn't live in a world without challenge. You know the truth. He belonged to the ice, always had. Back in England, the world moves on. There's another war on the horizon. New explorers plant flags in places Shackleton only dreamed of. But none of them, you think, quite understood what it meant to keep men alive, not just their bodies, but their hope. Because that's what he did, and that's what you carry now. The stories, the lessons, the quiet courage to look into the void and say, "Not today." You write it down in journals. You speak at schools. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right, you swear you hear the creak of old sails, the bark of sled dogs, the voice of Shackleton calling orders across the frozen sea. You wonder what he would have said to all this fame, all these monuments and medals. Probably something sarcastic. Something like, "Took them long enough." You smile, and sometimes when the room is very quiet, you find yourself slipping back. You feel the cold against your face. The canvas flap of the tent against your cheek, the familiar stink of seal fat, the shuffle of boots on ice. You see the faces Frank Wild, Worsley, Crean, Hurley, McNish, some smiling, some exhausted, all of them there, all of them alive. You remember the rhythm of their jokes, the way they snored, the way they'd curse when their socks froze stiff overnight. You remember Shackleton's grin when the tea boiled, and the sparkle in his eyes when someone mentioned Christmas pudding. You remember being afraid, but mostly you remember enduring. You exhale, because now the story is yours to tell. You, the last of the crew, sitting in a quiet room, surrounded by photographs and maps and the distant echo of a storm long past. You lean back, you close your eyes, and you speak one last time, not for fame, not for applause, but because someone needs to know. He kept us alive, not with rations, not with shelter, with belief, and that was enough. You're warm now, not just your body, but the space around you. Maybe a soft blanket draped over your legs, or a lamp casting a golden glow against your wall. Maybe you're listening to this with your eyes closed, the day melting quietly behind you. You've made it to the end of a journey, a long, cold one. You've walked on ice that cracked beneath your feet, sailed seas that swallowed ships, slept beneath skies so wide they made you feel like a speck in the cosmos. And through it all, one voice kept you steady, one presence never let go. Shackleton. It's strange how someone who lived a century ago can feel so close now, so real. But that's the gift of stories, of memory, of nights like this, where we pause and remember the quiet strength of those who came before us. You think back on what you heard tonight, men hauling lifeboats across miles of frozen wasteland, singing off-key on Christmas Eve, smiling through cracked lips because giving up simply wasn't an option. You think about belief, not the loud, flashy kind, but the quiet, relentless version that whispers, one more day, one more step. You can do this. You remember that, because someday, when things feel impossible, when the world feels as cold and vast as Antarctica, you'll reach back to this memory and you'll keep going. One step, one breath, just like Shackleton. The story is over. See you tomorrow night. Sweet dreams.